What's all this going on in the news at the moment about Nadhim Zahawi, the former Chancellor, the current chairman of the Conservative Party? Unpaid tax, trust structures, YouGov, £3.7 million, 30% penalties, HMRC settlements. Gosh, there's really a lot to get through and all we ever get is sound bites. But this is fascinating. So let's really dive into the detail. Let's look at this from a legal perspective. Hopefully you'll find it fascinating too. I'm Rosen, private client partner at Quastels, a central London law firm. And there are some really interesting tax and trust issues behind this case. So let's go to the whiteboard and try and break this one down. So who is Nadhim Zahawi? This is what we know. Iraqi born, made a lot of money in the UK. What exactly did he do? So you may have come across his company called YouGov. They're a sort of polling data analytics company. He founded this in the year 2000. So with my terrible stick figures, Nadhim Zahawi founded YouGov with his partner, Stephen Shakespeare. Each of them received 42.5%. With another guy, we're not going to go into too much detail about the other guy, but there was another guy who got 15%. I told you lawyers have got terrible handwriting. These are all allegations, we've got some information, but we're really at this point still trawling through the facts. This is what we know. This is Nadhim Zahawi. Around the time that YouGov was created, there was a contribution from Nadhim Zahawi's father, F for father, and he gave £7,000 as a capital contribution in addition to guidance because he himself was a legitimate business person. He had lots of experience of various successful enterprises. So he made that contribution, and in recognition of that contribution was indirectly given the 42.5% shares in YouGov. So how exactly did this work? What we know so far is that Nadhim Zahawi's father and his mother control a trust. T for trust or a triangle, however you'd like it. Underneath that trust is a Gibraltar company called Bullshaw Investments Limited. And under this are the shares in YouGov. So what's the fundamental question at this point? Nadhim Zahawi, who apparently co-founded YouGov, we now know that the 42.5% shares ends up being held within this family structure, which is held underneath a Gibraltar investment company. Why? How? Lots of questions. Now let's bear in mind an important factor. We're currently under the understanding. Remember, we're trying to break through what we're hearing in the media. It's all a bit confusing right now. But what we know is this. Nadhim Zahawi's father actually indirectly provided this capital contribution to YouGov. But it wasn't from him. I'm using the word indirectly on purpose because actually the contribution came via BIL. So £7,000 was contributed and BIL in turn received 42.5% of the shares. Now these shares ended up becoming extremely valuable. How do we know this? Because we know in around 2018, a disposal was made of 20% of the shares. And we're assuming at this point that they're still held within this trust structure. So 20% shares end up triggering a disposal of £27 million, which creates a tax liability of about £3.6 million, which is capital gains tax on the disposal of the shares. But of course, at this point, we know that there was no tax because the disposal was made in 2018, no tax returns were submitted. And of course, going back to principles here, if this was triggered within the trust structure as a offshore trust, there wouldn't be any capital gains tax implications. And that's where the questions arise. So how did a UK resident, UK domiciled individual who founded a UK company end up allocating shares into an offshore trust structure, which have led to a total failure to pay tax until very recently? So why has this issue arisen now? Dan Needle, who's a tax expert, who was formerly a partner at British Chancellor in the tax department, has gone through some of the paperwork. And this, it seems, led to an investigation and a settlement that was reached very recently with HMRC, with not just the tax being paid, but a 30% penalty being added in addition to the tax liability. Now here's the question. How can you pay tax or be liable for tax on an asset which you don't even own? So what has Nadhim Zahawi said up until now? Nadhim Zahawi has said that he is not a beneficiary of BIL. Now, of course, what does that mean? How can you be a beneficiary of a company? That would mean you're a shareholder, but we know that BIL is held by the family trust. So does he mean the beneficiary of the trust? And if that's the case, what are the tax implications of receiving a capital distribution from a trust while you're UK tax resident? Possibly huge. So is that what's happened? Is it possible that a trust has been created around the time, this entire structure has been created around the time that YouGov was first formed and was used as a vehicle in order to mitigate the tax exposure for Nadhim Zahawi himself? We don't know at this point. This is just purely allegations. But we do know officially that a settlement has been reached and that a penalty has been added on top of that. Now the penalty talks about carelessness. So this is not deliberate. We're not in the realm of tax evasion at this point. but we know that maybe he hasn't sought the right advice at some point, but whatever it is, a tax liability has now fallen on Nadhim Zahawi, which would seem to suggest that somehow he has benefited from the shares that were in the offshore structure. So Nadhim Zahawi talks about the fact that he's not currently a beneficiary of the structure, and neither are his family members. But we do know from documents that have been uncovered by Dan Needle that around 2005, he was able to benefit from a £99,000 dividend from YouGov, which was to do with the repayment of a loan. Now, that would look like at some level, he, even if he's not a beneficiary of the trust, which itself would cause various UK tax issues, that he has benefited in some other way. And that would have UK tax issues. So lots of questions at this point, lots of answers that really need to come back. But we know that there is a tax liability, which must mean that at some level, he has received a benefit from an offshore trust. This is all super important. As I said, we're not getting into the politics of this. What I care about is the tax, the trust. It's fascinating. And no one is saying that these aren't legitimate structures if they're used correctly. What we're saying here is, has the structure been used in some way in order to mitigate tax over an asset that Nadhim Zahawi, a UK resident, UK domiciled individual, and it just so happens a member of parliament, quite up in the Conservative Party, has been able to benefit from? A lot of questions, but what it does speak to is this, that when it comes to complexities of tax, when it comes to the complexity of trust, proper advice has to be sought at the right time. What you don't want is to have a situation where you're having to uncover all these issues and then clear up a mess. If you sort this out correctly, if you take the right advice, you're not going to end up with issues where you're sitting down with HMRC. You're going to have the peace of mind of knowing that actually what you have set up has been set up correctly and at the right time, and it benefits the right individuals in the right way.